This isn't some story I heard from a friend of a friend. This happened to me, and it's a difficult thing to talk about, but it's time. The weight of the mahogany gavel in my hand felt familiar, a solid piece of my life's work I'd carved myself 30 years ago. I stood at the head of the long table in the private dining room at the steakhouse in Boston's Beacon Hill, its dark wood paneling echoing the timber that had built my fortune. My board members, my oldest friends and colleagues, were all there, their faces warm in the candlelight, waiting for me to pass the symbol of my company, my legacy, to my only son. But as I looked at Julian, I saw his eyes weren't on me. They were on our CFO, Brenda, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He cleared his throat, stood up, and took a document from her before I could speak a word. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice smooth as polished cherry wood. "As of this morning, invoking Article 7, Section 4 of the company bylaws, the board has voted to accept my father's immediate retirement due to diminished capacity, effective now. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows." The sound in the room vanished. It was like I was underwater, the faces of my friends blurring into a watercolor of confusion and pity. Diminished capacity? The words were clinical, sterile, a legal dagger designed to gut a man without spilling a drop of blood. My gavel, the one I'd intended to hand over in a gesture of paternal pride, suddenly felt like a full scepter. Julian's voice droned on about a new direction, a strategic pivot, and modernizing for a new era. He never once looked at me. He was a stranger wearing my son's face, standing in my son's $1,000 suit. I had built Artisan Millworks from nothing in a dusty South Boston workshop, my hands cracked and bleeding from shaping the stubborn oak and walnut that became the fixtures in the city's most prestigious homes and offices. My late wife, Eleanor, used to bring me coffee in a thermos and wrap my hands in bandages at the end of the day. Every splinter, every scar, was a chapter in the story of building a future for Julian. And now, that future was telling me I was no longer fit to be part of it. I slowly placed the gavel on the white linen tablecloth. The solid thud it made was the only sound that felt real. My legacy wasn't being passed on, it was being seized. My son hadn't just taken my company. He had taken my name, my story, my mind, and told the world they were all broken. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor, and without a word, I walked out of that room, the warmth of the life I had built turning to ice on my back. The first quiet months were a fog of shame and disbelief. I was legally barred from the Seaport District headquarters, my email was deactivated, and my calls to board members, men I'd vacationed with, men who were godfathers to my son, went to voicemail. Julian had been thorough. He and Brenda had spent months laying the groundwork, seeding doubts about my memory, my health, my grip on the modern market. They'd twisted my grief over Eleanor's passing 2 years prior into a narrative of a man lost in the past, incapable of leading. They used my love for my late wife as the weapon to paint me as incompetent. The humiliation was a physical weight. I'd see our company's trucks on the street, the logo I'd sketched on a napkin 40 years ago, and have to turn away, my throat tight. The betrayal was a constant, low hum in the back of my mind. But it was the small things that truly twisted the knife. Seeing a picture in Boston Magazine of Julian and Brenda at a charity gala, his arm around her, hailed as the city's new power couple revitalizing a stagnant heritage brand. My brand, my heritage. It was then that the grief began to curdle into something harder, something colder. Suspicion. It started with a call from Miguel, my old workshop foreman, a man who had been with me for 35 years. He'd been offered a generous early retirement package a week after my ousting. He told me they were liquidating the entire inventory of aged hardwood, the rare, precious stock I'd spent decades curating. "They're selling it for pennies on the dollar, Arthur," he'd said, his voice heavy. "Black walnut from Pennsylvania, bird's eye maple from Michigan, your collection. They're calling it dead inventory." That didn't make sense. That wood was the soul of the company, our competitive advantage. Julian knew that. Unless the goal wasn't just to modernize, but to burn the past to the ground and collect the insurance money. I still had my old personal laptop, which, by some miracle of their arrogance, they'd overlooked. It had an archived version of the company's server from 6 months before the coup. I started digging. Late into the night, fueled by black coffee and a growing sense of dread, I sifted through old emails, project files, accounting spreadsheets. At first, nothing. Everything looked clean, professional. But Julian had learned his craft from me. He knew how to hide the flaws. I, however, knew how to find them. I didn't look in the business folders. I looked in the metadata, the revision histories, the digital footprints left behind. And there, buried in the code of an old accounting file, I found a ghost, a deleted folder path labeled Project Nightingale. It was empty, wiped clean. But a name is a powerful thing. A nightingale sings in the dark. It's a secret messenger. And I suddenly knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was where they kept their secrets. The problem was, I had no idea how to find what they had made sure was gone for good. But I knew I had to try, because the first faint notes of that nightingale song were starting to sound less like a business plan and more like a conspiracy. I wasn't a hacker. I was a craftsman who appreciated the clean lines of code as much as the grain of a piece of wood. I spent the next week learning everything I could about data recovery. I bought sophisticated software and ran it on the archived server image, targeting the ghost folder, Project Nightingale. For days, it yielded nothing but corrupted fragments. I was about to give up, staring at a screen of digital gibberish, when a single, intact file emerged from the wreckage. It was a PDF, a bill of lading. It was for a lumber shipment, but the supplier was one I'd never heard of, Silva Preta Importacos. The port of origin was Manaus, Brazil. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Years ago, I had been approached by a broker offering incredibly cheap, high-grade mahogany from that very region. But my own research revealed the suppliers were notorious for illegal logging in protected Amazonian territories. Using them would have been faster, cheaper, and a moral black hole. I had personally blacklisted the entire network and written it into our corporate ethical sourcing policy. The policy Julian had just shredded. This was more than just selling off old inventory. He was actively sourcing illegal materials. This wasn't a pivot. It was a perversion of everything I had built. The power Julian wielded was absolute. He had the money, the lawyers, and the narrative. He hired Ropes and Gray, a behemoth of a law firm in the Prudential Tower, who began sending me threatening letters. Cease and desists. Warnings against corporate defamation. They were building a paper wall around my own company to keep me out. One afternoon, I saw him. I was walking past the construction site for the new Four Seasons in Dalton Street, a project I'd bid on before I was forced out. Julian was there, walking the site with the developers, Brenda at his side. He was laughing, pointing at the steel skeleton of the building, the very picture of a young, confident titan of industry. He looked vital, powerful, untouchable. He had my life, my legacy, and he was wearing it better than I ever had. The city saw a visionary. I saw a grave robber. That evening, I drove to the old workshop in South Boston, the place where it all began. I expected to feel a sense of nostalgia, of loss. Instead, I was met with a new horror. A chain-link fence surrounded the property. A large sign was hammered into the lawn. Future home of the Foundry Lofts, luxury living. They had sold it. The brick building where I'd laid the foundation of my family's future, the place where Eleanor's ghost still felt close, was being gutted to become condos for tech brothers. That was the moment. The grief, the shame, the suspicion, it all burned away, leaving behind a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. This was no longer about getting my company back. It wasn't about the money or the title. This was about justice. Julian hadn't just stolen my business. He had desecrated a memory. He had sold his mother's ghost for a profit margin. Standing there, watching the demolition lights flicker across the face of my old workshop, I made a new vow. He had used the law to call me diminished. I would use the truth to show him what it meant to be truly ruined. My war wouldn't be fought in a boardroom. It would be fought in the shadows he and Brenda had created, and I would be the one to drag their secrets into the light. My hands, which had once shaped wood, would now shape their downfall. My first move was to embrace the role they'd cast for me, the forgotten old man. I sold my house in Brookline, the big, empty monument to a life that no longer existed, and used the capital to move into a small apartment in the North End. I let my beard grow gray. I bought a simple car. I became invisible, and from that invisibility, I began to work. My first real investment was not in lawyers, but in a man named Costello, a private investigator who operated out of a cramped office above a Quincy market. He was a former investigative journalist, cynical and sharp, with a network that ran deep into the city's underbelly. I didn't tell him the whole story. I just told him I was an environmental activist consultant looking into illegal timber imports. I gave him the name, Silva Preta Importacos. I needed a clean, undeniable chain of custody from a protected rainforest in Brazil to a container ship, and from that ship to the port of Boston, and from that port to the new Artisan Millworks warehouse. Costello was expensive, but he was good. While he worked his sources, I focused on Brenda. Julian was the face, but Brenda was the architect. She was the one who had likely found the legal loophole, the one managing the finances, the one who would have built the firewall to hide their crimes. I needed to get inside her head. I spent a week just watching her, learning her routine from a distance. The 7 a.m. espresso at a cafe in the financial district, the lunchtime spin class at Equinox, the Thursday night cocktails with her friends at a bar called Drink in Fort Point. She was meticulous, predictable. Her digital life, I wagered, would be the same. I used a social engineering trick I'd read about. I created a fake alumni networking event invitation for the Wharton School of Business, her alma mater. The email was flawless, personalized, referencing her graduation year and a professor I found on her LinkedIn. It contained a link to a secure portal to RSVP. That portal was a mirror of the real Wharton site, but it was mine. All I needed was for her to enter her password. For 3 agonizing days, nothing happened. I thought she'd seen through it. Then, late one Wednesday night, I got the notification. She'd logged in. I had her password. It was shockingly simple. Julian AM 2024. The arrogance was breathtaking. I now had the key, but I didn't use it on her company email. That would be too easily traced. Instead, I accessed her personal cloud storage. And there, buried in a folder titled Vacation Planning, I found their entire playbook. Scanned copies of forged documents, putting my signature on asset transfers. Emails between her and Julian, mocking me, calling me a sentimental dinosaur. And the smoking gun, a detailed spreadsheet outlining the shell corporation, Nightingale Holdings, LLC, they were using to purchase the illegal lumber from Silva Preta and then sell it back to Artisan Millworks at a massive markup, hiding the source and skimming the profits. The name was their private joke, the nightingale that sings in the dark. But the most damning file was an audio recording. It was a phone call between Julian and a man with a thick Portuguese accent. It was a recording Julian must have made for his own protection. In it, my son was laughing as he negotiated the price for a shipment of endangered Brazilian rosewood. A species so protected its trade was a federal crime under the Lacey Act, an offense that carried prison time. He wasn't just breaking the law, he was reveling in it. The sound of my son's laughter as he sold out his own father's principles was the last piece of my old heart breaking. Costello's report came in a week later, complete with satellite photos of the logging site, shipping manifests, and bank transfers. I now had everything. I had the crime, the proof, and the motive. I had the cage. All that was left was to get the animals inside it. The final act required a stage. Julian, in his infinite arrogance, provided one himself. Artisan Millworks won the contract for all the custom woodwork and interiors for a new, obscenely luxurious hotel being built in the seaport, the Olympian. To celebrate, Julian scheduled a massive press conference at the construction site, inviting reporters, city officials, and investors. He was going to announce the partnership and unveil the design concepts I knew from Brenda's cloud, that were based on sketches I had made years ago. The press conference was my deadline. I spent weeks meticulously preparing. I compiled all the evidence, the emails, the forged documents, the bank statements for Nightingale Holdings, the shipping manifests, Costello's satellite photos, and the damning audio recording of Julian's call, into a single, devastating video presentation. I wove it together into a timeline, a story of calculated greed and betrayal. This couldn't just be an anonymous data dump. It needed to be cinematic. It needed to be a public execution. My contact was a young, hungry investigative reporter from the Boston Globe named Sarah Jenkins. I'd followed her work. She was relentless and had a talent for taking down corrupt city officials. I met her in a crowded coffee shop in Cambridge, passing her a simple USB drive. "I'm giving you the biggest story of your career," I told her, my face obscured by a hat and scarf. The press conference for the Olympian Hotel is in 3 days. Be there. Don't publish anything until you see my signal. When the time is right, you'll know." I could see the skepticism in her eyes, but the glint of ambition won out. The final piece of the puzzle was a man named David Chun, the A/V technician for the event management company Julian had hired. He was a freelancer, and Costello's research found he was drowning in medical debt for his daughter. I met him in his truck 2 nights before the event. I didn't threaten him. I simply laid out my case and offered him a solution. I showed him a cashier's check for $50,000. "I don't want you to do anything illegal," I said calmly. "I just want you to plug this USB drive into the master presentation laptop right before the event starts. It's set to run on a timer. You plug it in, walk away, and the rest is out of your hands. This money will help your family." What they did destroyed mine. He stared at the check, then at me, his eyes searching my face. He saw the truth there. He took the drive. The morning of the press conference was cold and gray, a classic Boston sky. I sat in a rental car parked across the street from the construction site, a clear view of the large outdoor stage. I could see Julian, looking sharp and confident, shaking hands with the hotel CEO. Brenda stood just behind him, a smug smile plastered on her face. They looked like royalty presiding over their kingdom. My kingdom. I had a pair of binoculars, and through them, I watched David Chun approach the tech booth. He milled around for a moment, then leaned over the laptop. I saw a flicker of movement as he inserted the drive. He then picked up a clipboard and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for my son to walk into it. Julian stepped up to the podium, a triumphant smile on his face. The oversized screens behind him displayed the gleaming Artisan Millworks logo. He began his speech, his voice echoing across the assembled crowd. He spoke of innovation, of a bold new future, of casting off the dusty traditions of the past. He was unknowingly delivering his own eulogy. I watched the digital clock on my dashboard. The program was timed to launch precisely 10 minutes into his speech, right when he would be at his most self-congratulatory. "We are not just building furniture," he declared, his arms spread wide. "We are building the future of Boston luxury." At that exact moment, the logo on the screens behind him vanished. It was replaced by a single, high-resolution image, the front page of a forged document, my signature flawlessly replicated, signing over controlling interest of the company. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Julian faltered, turning to look at the screen. His confident smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure confusion. Then, the timeline began. Brenda's mocking emails appeared, projected 20 feet high for the world to see. The spreadsheet for Nightingale Holdings, with its illegal transactions, filled the screen. Then came Costello's satellite photos, showing the brutal, illegal deforestation in the Amazon, followed by the shipping manifest that tied the stolen wood directly to the port of Boston. Julian's face had gone from confused to ashen. He was frantically gesturing to the tech booth, but no one was responding. The crowd was silent, utterly captivated by the public unraveling of the man before them. Then came the finale, the audio file. My son's voice, clear as a bell, filled the cold air. The sound of him laughing as he negotiated the purchase of endangered rosewood. The sound of his greed, his utter lack of conscience. I saw the hotel CEO, who had been standing proudly beside him, take 2 slow steps back, his face a storm of fury. Sarah Jenkins, the reporter, was already on her feet, her voice cutting through the silence. "Mr. Thorne, can you confirm this is your voice negotiating the illegal purchase of protected timber?" Her question opened the floodgates. The other reporters surged forward, a cacophony of shouted questions and flashing cameras. Julian stood frozen, a statue of guilt. But the show wasn't over. As if on cue, 2 black sedans with government plates pulled up to the edge of the site. Federal agents from the EPA and the Department of Justice stepped out, their faces grim. They moved calmly and efficiently through the chaotic crowd, directly towards the stage. They didn't put him in handcuffs right away. They simply flanked him and Brenda, their presence a clear and undeniable statement. The deal was dead. The company was ruined. My son's future was over. I watched them lead him off the stage, his head bowed, the cameras following his every step on his walk of shame. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, chilling emptiness. The gavel I had once held was meant to build a legacy. Instead, it had fallen like an axe. I started the car and drove away, not looking back, the sounds of my son's destroyed world fading in my rearview mirror. Months have passed. The legal fallout was biblical. Artisan Millworks was buried under federal indictments, its assets frozen, its name now synonymous with corporate malfeasance. Julian and Brenda both took plea deals to avoid a longer sentence, but prison was unavoidable. The news report said he was sentenced to 7 years. A quiet end to a loud collapse. I didn't attend any of the hearings. I didn't need to. I had already seen the verdict delivered on that cold morning in the seaport. With a portion of the money I had left, I bought a small workshop, not in the city, but out in the quiet woods of western Massachusetts. It's not much, just a single room filled with the scent of sawdust and wood varnish. I don't have employees or a boardroom. I have my old tools, my hands, and the wood. It's enough. The other day, a letter arrived. It was from the federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. The handwriting was Julian's. I recognized the slope of the letters, the same way he'd written his name on his school papers when he was a boy. I held it for a long time, feeling the weight of the paper, the ghost of the son I had raised. I thought about all the things he might have written. An apology? An excuse? A curse? In the end, it didn't matter. There was nothing he could say that would change the simple, hard truth of what he had done and what I was forced to do in return. I walked over to the wood-burning stove I used to heat the shop, opened the small iron door, and tossed the unopened letter into the flames. I watched it curl, turn black, and disappear into ash. I taught my son how to build a legacy, but I never thought I'd have to teach him that some foundations are meant to be broken. The end.